Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how you doing?
I am doing great. I am noticing the shortening days.
Yeah. They are. They get darker early.
But one thing I enjoy about this time of year, especially when I'm working out in the garden, do you notice the sun's getting a little lower on the horizon, but it makes the shadows and the light, it really pops. I like the way the flowers and garden look this time of year. It starts getting a different look to it. So I'm enjoying this time of year as well.
Well, and then also for us in our yard, I noticed that we're getting a little bit more shade earlier in the day, which is nice. When you get home from work, you can find that shady spot, especially if it's been a little hot outside, and you can sit out there and you can
the sun isn't so high in the sky and not quite so intense, so I enjoy this time of year.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that we're going to get to, but one of the things that we want to talk about right away is there's a couple of events coming up with North Dakota State University Extension Services, right?
There are. In horticulture, we've got a couple of field days coming up in September, and one is, and first of all, I should say, they're at the Horticulture Research Farm, which is a wonderful 40-acre research farm, and it's been there since about the 1980 or so, and a wonderful 40 acres of trees, shrubs, and arboretum in the middle. It's absolutely a gem, and so if you've never been there, consider attending one of these events that I'll be talking about. It's located about 40 miles west of Fargo, between Absaraka and Amenia, North Dakota. And so anyway, let me start by saying that on Thursday afternoon, September 7th, approximately 4 in the afternoon, the vegetable and fruit portion of this field day will be. So if you are interested in vegetables and what the research is being done and fruit, think about attending. And on Saturday, September 9th, will be the event there at the Horticulture Farm called Branch Out. A clever name. That will do the woody plants, trees, shrubs, ornamentals. And there will be tours of the Arboretum. Now, this is the largest collection of trees and shrubs in North Dakota and in much of the region. The Arboretum itself consists of approximately 35 acres of trees and shrubs. It takes a long time to walk through it. I worked there when I was a young student, and my first job was a research technician out there. Beautiful. So anyway, that again was September 7th, a Thursday, and September 9th, a Saturday. The vegetables on Thursday, the woody ornamentals, trees, shrubs on Saturday. And registration is required because, lunch is going to be served on Thursday and I believe also on Saturday, so they need a count. So, for example, on Saturday, the count is going to be capped at 75 people, so that's going to fill up quick. So if you have interest, a couple of things you can do. You can do an online search, NDSU Extension Horticulture Field Days. Should pop up, or email me. Let's get my email address.
Yeah.
Donald.Kinsler, I'll spell that, Kinzler, at ndsu.edu. And I'll certainly forward the information to you for the registration link as well. And it is, someday, John, you need to get out there. Like I say, really it's a hidden gem.
So at these events, are they going to be showing off? Will this be a way to see maybe some varieties that we may see coming out, that have been in development?
Yes, definitely. In the vegetables portion, we'll be talking about some of the research that they're doing on vegetables, good ways to grow vegetables and fruits. And on the Saturday Woody Plants Branch Out, it's called, clever play on words, I always think. But anyway, that will include some of the research that is being done, kind of looking at some of the new things that are yet to come out, but it will also show you some of the things that have already been introduced. See, this is the farm where those things are tested before they're released. So, for example, prairie stature oak that is already on the market, you'll be able to see the parent tree of that out there, one that has been in place for quite a few years already.
Oh, so
it takes 20 years or so to develop a new tree and shrub variety to make sure it goes through enough of our winters to see what it's all about. So some of those, if you're thinking, gosh, it'd be kind of fun to do a Prairie Statesman Swiss stone pine, and of course they look so cute at the garden centers, small, but you'll be able to see the parent one that's about 30 feet tall. So yeah, it'll be fun.
Isn't that kind of fun to think about, like something that on my end as a consumer and as a novice gardener, I may see something out and I may see that it says it's labeled new, that something's new to the market, and it is new to the market. But like you're saying, the plant has been in the process and
undergone
it's been growing
years
for
of testing
decades,
and trial.
Decades.
And so what a valuable thing this is for our state, developing these new varieties that are well adapted to our climate and our soil.
Yeah,
so what great value.
Yeah, really important, because our climate is not, and especially here in the Red River Valley, the soil is also very different too than, is this, I suppose even 40 miles away, the soil is a little bit different, isn't it?
It is. And the reason it was chosen 40 miles west of Fargo was to be a little more typical of the soil that's across the state and the region. So it wasn't just in the heavy Fargo clay, because not all the region has heavy Fargo clay. So it's a little more typical. And I'll be giving a little talk. Other people will be giving little presentations as well. So there's good education to be had.
Will you be talking at both events?
I will. Yep, I'll be talking at both events. On the Saturday day, I will be talking about ways to kind of improve our landscapes with the trees and shrubs that we install, ways to kind of make it look a little better.
Okay.
And on the vegetable portion on Thursday, I'll be talking about kind of a review of how this growing season has been.
Yeah.
The reason why some of our tomatoes maybe didn't taste as well on certain times that they ripened, and so please do. I'll be there at both events. Yeah, look me up.
Well, not to get we don't want to take away any of the information that you'll be talking about there. But how would you say the growing season has been?
Hot and dry.
Yeah.
How is that for?
Well, hot and dry.
How is that?
But,
and of course, we can water, and as all of us gardeners know, you can water till you're blue in the face, and nothing substitutes a good rain.
No. And
also, it's been hot.
Yep.
We've had some long stretches of heat, and that has had definite impacts even on some of our vegetables. Some of the things just think, well, gosh, some things like hot, tomatoes, melons, but they have an upper heat threshold, which is the upper 80s. And when we have extensive periods in the 90s, which we had this year, it tends to adversely affect even heat-loving crops. And of course, our lawns, big impact on lawns.
Big impact on lawns. How about this recent humidity where it's been just so damp? Does that have an effect on growing and gardens and lawns?
It's a hotbed of disease just waiting to happen. This humidity, the layers of moisture on the leaves, fungus love heat and humidity.
So if you're watering now, you should particularly
keep it on the soil.
Make sure you don't get it on the leaves.
Don't splash. Yeah, because it's really a hotbed of fungus just waiting to happen if this humidity continues.
Well, we're going to take a quick little break now, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Labor Day coming up and things we should know for Labor Day and beyond.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Hey, Don, what do you call a rude landscaper?
I don't know.
I call him a grass hole.
Now, do you subscribe to Dad's Jokes Are Us by any chance?
I do look these up, and they tend to be on dad joke sites. Yeah,
they do. It's hard to beat a good dad joke.
It is. They work. They work on a lot of levels. So we do have Labor Day coming up, and it is, for a lot of us, it's an extra day off in the week, a day that we should appreciate. But also for those of us who have gardens and lawns, it's maybe an extra day that we should be out there and doing some work, weather permitting.
It is. It's a pivot point in the growing season because Labor Day is a day when we should be laboring in the garden. And I mean, for most of us, it is a labor of love too. So it's not as workaholic as you might think it sounds. But anyway, yeah, definitely a pivot point because there are some things we should or can be doing around Labor Day. And the most important thing that I could emphasize is fertilizing the lawn. It's been 3 tough years on lawns. It's been generally hot, dry, you can water, but our lawns are cool season grasses. Cool meaning that they thrive when it's sunny and 70 degrees, when moisture is plentiful, then our lawns are beautiful. May, June, then sometimes they hunker down a little bit in the middle of summer, but then they get nice again late August through September. Our lawns are beautiful. They like it cool. But these last 3 years, we've had extended stretches of hot and drier than they would like. And so our lawns, mine included, looks thin, not nearly as lush as I would like it to be. So the fall has been shown by turf research to be the single most important time of the entire growing season for a lawn to recover and grow. It gets its second wind. And so starting about Labor Day, if we give our lawn the nutrition it needs through fertilizer, if we give it the nutrition it needs, that lawn in September will produce deep roots and it'll fill out sideways. Our lawns, our grass has a great ability to move sideways. That's why you need to trim along your sidewalk, because it even wants to grow out over your sidewalk. So anyway, the turf research has shown that in the fall, in September, that's when the grass plants are making their most growth, even more so than in spring. And so that's why they need that nutrition. Grass is a heavy feeder. I love that term, heavy feeder. So anyway, we need to be fertilizing to give it that nutrition. And the nutrition, what we do this fall in the way of nutrition, and of course it's going to need moisture too to make that fertilizer available to the roots. But what we do this fall is going to determine how that lawn will do next spring and summer. A couple of falls ago, as I was fertilizing our lawn, I ran out of fertilizer, and I didn't get a portion fertilized. And the following spring, I took a photo because you could see a sharp line of demarcation between where I had fertilized and where I had ran out. Where I had ran out, the grass was a lighter green, it was noticeably thinner, and it maintained that look. I photographed it. Put it on Facebook and everywhere appropriate, and so it made a big difference. So it's not one of those just kind of nice little extra things that you might do. It's really necessary because our lawns need to get into recuperation mode, and so that fertilizer is really, really important. Oh, now I should mention, common question is, do we need to use a winterizer fertilizer? When you go to the hardware store, the chain store, the garden center, you'll see the regular fertilizer for lawns that you use all season or in the spring, but you'll also see in the fall one's called winterizer fertilizer. It has a little more phosphorus. Now, most of our soils have enough phosphorus. We don't really necessarily need that. So you can use the winterizer type, or you can just use the regular lawn fertilizer. That works good. It doesn't necessarily have to be the one labeled for winterizer.
Yeah, what should we look for in a fertilizer?
The main thing in fertilizer, on any fertilizer package, you see 3 numbers, which stands for the 3 main nutrients that plants need. The first number is nitrogen, and then phosphorus, and then potassium, NPK. Well, anyway, grass needs a lot of nitrogen. Nitrogen is the nutrient that stimulates leafy growth. And since grass is lots of leafy growth, the nitrogen number, the first number, is always high. And you do get what you pay for. A cheaper brand might be less of that nitrogen, maybe only like 15%. The higher quality fertilizers would be 25 to maybe 30% of nitrogen. So that first number would be 25 or 30. And some of the national brands probably have more science in them than the generic brands. So oftentimes you do get what you pay for, as the old saying goes. And so because we want our lawns to recuperate after 3 tough growing seasons, this maybe isn't the time to scrimp on a bargain type of fertilizer.
And is this something, the kind of fertilizer that you would put in the same carrier like you would with your lawn seed? What do they call those, with the rotator or the
there are two
distributor?
type of fertilizer spreaders which can also be used for seed and grass.
Seed, yeah.
One is called a cyclone spreader, which the fertilizer drops out, and then there's a little mechanism that goes in a circle, and it, like a cyclone, shoots it kind of out.
It's a little disc, and it's got ridges
Exactly.
on it, so that when it catches it, it throws them out.
Spreads it out in kind of a circle. The other type is called a drop spreader, and the fertilizer drops, as the name suggests, drops straight down. And that's the type that I like. The reason I like the drop spreader is because you follow your wheel tracks. You go back and forth. You go down one swipe, turn around, see where your wheel track is, come back the other way. The thing I personally don't like about the cyclone spreaders, when you're next to your driveway and sidewalks, you get fertilizer all over those, and fertilizer is quite corrosive to concrete. And yeah, I know you can sweep it off, but the cyclone, since it shoots it out in kind of an unknown pattern to you, it's hard to know how to overlap, because you can burn if you get too much on. So I feel the drop spreader places it straight down, and I can see where I'm applying that better than the cyclone spreader.
Do we want to do this do you want to water before or after, or do we want to do this around the time it rains, or do we want to have it on, put the fertilizer on while it's dry and then let it be dry for a period of time? How do we treat around it?
Yeah, it goes on best dry. And these fertilizers, most of the homeowner type fertilizers are the dry granules. So they kind of need to go on when the lawn is dry. I've tried when there's a little light rain, I've tried to put it on. I've protected the fertilizer so it wasn't getting wet, but still things seem to gum up. So it does apply better if the lawn is dry. I've already bought my lawn fertilizer, and I'm listening to the weather very carefully because I want to make sure that I get this granular fertilizer on before some rain. And so I'm hoping with Labor Day, I don't want Labor Day to be all rainy, and ruin everybody's weekend. But I'm hoping that I'll be able to get this fertilizer on, and then a day or two later have a nice, gentle inch or two of rain that will activate those granules and get it down into the root system. And if that doesn't happen, if we get into a dry spell, then I think I should water. I should put out the sprinkler, because those dry granules need to turn into a solution that the roots can drink up. So I am hoping for a good rain. So the preferred is to get the fertilizer on when the lawn is dry, and then have a nice soaking rain would be absolutely awesome. And Labor Day is, give or take a few days, but approximate Labor Day is the preferred time to fertilize the lawn.
Yeah, I was going to ask for a window. So you're saying basically within a week on either side?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And kind of the closer to Labor Day, the better, rather than getting too far down into September. But a day or two isn't going to matter. It's also it's interesting that turf research has shown that if you were to fertilize your lawn once per year, September is much more important than the spring.
Really?
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
It is.
Yeah, because that's when the root growth and things, that's when things are preparing for next spring. And actually that kind of makes sense, because I've noticed take perennial flowers. The fertilizer and the care that you give them this year, it's going to help with these blossoms too. But perennial flowers, perennial plants, are always storing up energy for the future because they live into the future. And so the care that we give them this year will be reflected in how they grow next year. If we give them good care, good nutrition this year, our peonies will bloom better next spring. And so on. So it makes sense that turf grass will be the same thing. What we do now in the fall, that gives it the energy to recover and become even better next year.
How about with lawn mowing? Do we want to mow before we do that, before we fertilize? And if so, do we want to bag it so that the fertilizer is just not falling on clips that are dying anyway? How do we want to just wait and let the lawn grow a little shaggy or something like that?
Yeah, it does help to mow if your lawn needs mowing, it does help to mow it before the fertilizer sprayer just kind of glides over better and the fertilizer beads will find their way down. But you bring up the interesting point about mowing height. I think we've talked about mowing height before, the importance of keeping a mowing height at about 3 inches because a turf is healthiest. So throughout the month of September, the turf should be maintained at that 3 inch. In October, we can reduce the mowing height. But keeping that mowing height at the recommended high 3 inches is very important. So a person wouldn't lower the mowing height before you fertilize. But if it's grown higher and needs it, then mow it to the 3-inch level, then fertilize. And did that answer the question?
Yeah. What about, it's talking about lawn care. Is this a good time then to overseed and to fill in patches in your lawn?
Yeah, it really is. We're talking about the whole scheme of September being a great month for grass. It recovers, does well, grows well. And yes, seeding. Many of us need to do some overseeding. And we need to repair some blank spots in our lawn. I've got an area that's it's thin, and I know that I need to put some seed in it. September is a great time to seed, and here's a couple of reasons why. The soil is warm. In thinking versus spring, if we seed grass in spring, the big soil mass, the earth, is cold from coming through winter. So the soil's cold. It's going to have to warm up quite a bit before that grass seed will sprout. But in September here, we've gone through all of summer with that soil heating up. So there's a big bank of warmth in the earth. And so when we seed in September, that seed is going to come up much quicker. Also, weeds, believe it or not, tend to start slowing down, and so there's less weed pressure in September than there is earlier, and so it just works really, really well. Plus, if you can time it so we'd get some good September rains, sometime we'll have a week of rainy weather. I hope we get a week of rainy weather this September. And so if you time it so you've got that down, watering and evaporation is less in September also, so it's easier to keep it watered. Now, we mentioned overseeding. So many of us that are wanting to thicken up our lawns from these bare spots, if that grass seed falls on kind of the fluff, the thatch, it might not come in contact with the soil enough. So it's important to rake it really good, vigorously, to try to get that seed that you apply down into some contact with soil. This is also a great time to power rake, which is also called dethatching. A great time in September to go over it with the power rake, especially if you're going to overseed. That will help that seed to penetrate down into the turf better. Also, core aeration that takes out the little cores. I've looked into maybe renting one of those from the local rental shop, renting that for a weekend and core aerating my own lawn and then overseeding it. Core aeration pulls out those little plugs of soil, opens up the turf, and that would also allow the seed to get into better contact.
So you're going to be doing both fertilizing and some overseeding. What is your what's your timeline then? Because you probably don't want to put seed down on top of fertilizer or fertilizer on top of seed, because one of the things with seeding too, you may want to put it down when it's actually been a little wet, and then it'll get wet right. You want it to start watering it right away. So you probably want a little distance there between the two?
That's the perfect question, because newly sprouting seedlings could be burnt by the strong fertilizer. So in the areas that I want to overseed, I'm going to buy, I haven't bought it yet, I'm going to buy a fertilizer that is for newly seeded lawns. So when a person goes to the garden center or the national chain store, hardware store, there are bags of fertilizer that right on the front it says for seeding lawns. Seeding lawns or newly seeded lawns. And it will be a little lighter in strength, but it will give grass the nutrition it needs, but it won't burn the new seedlings. So on areas that I'm not overseeding, I'm going to apply that fertilizer I said I already bought that's the regular strength. But for areas that are thin, I'm going to not fertilize those with the heavy strength fertilizer, and I'm going to overseed. So power rake or core rake or rake first, then and whether you apply the fertilizer first or the seed first doesn't really matter. But the key there is in those areas, use the fertilizer that's for a newly seeded area.
So you have a big lawn. You have got a big yard. So you probably wouldn't want to necessarily water yourself. I can understand where you would want to let nature do it and have some rain. You've been to my yard. My yard's relatively small. Is it okay if I put down fertilizer just to water right then,
Yes,
and just to
definitely.
get it directly in? And
in fact, our lawn, some of our areas have gotten thin enough. So if we don't get rain, I am definitely going to put the sprinklers out. And I'll put my tuna can out so that I'm getting an inch
your 1
on
inch,
there.
yep.
Yeah, getting a 1 inch on there, and so that I'm getting some good moisture down in. Because the key to success, especially if you're seeding or overseeding, is that grass seed needs continual moisture in order to sprout. And of course, for the fertilizer to take hold, even if you aren't overseeding, that fertilizer to take hold needs that moisture. So even though our city water can be a little expensive, if we don't get the rain, I'm going to make that investment and I'm going to water our lawn, because I put that much importance on what happens here to our lawn in September.
so now my especially my front lawn, which I haven't watered as much, it's getting really tough with a lot of thistles and weeds, things like that. You've said before that this is also a good time to be not only just to fertilize, but to also you can do some spot weed killing too, right?
Those weeds are so obnoxious because as our lawn's thinned or under a little stress, the weeds just take advantage. I guess that's what makes them a good weed. But, some of the areas where the lawn's thinned a little bit, then it seems the thistles and things proliferate. And so on the upside of that is September is a good time to control these perennial type weeds, the thistles, the dandelions, anything else that's a plantain is another one that you see. Those weeds are smart, and they sense these shortening days, and they're starting to get ready for winter already. They're storing up energy down in the root system so they come back to haunt us next year. And if we apply herbicide, weed killer, in September here, they will also carry that material down into the root system, so you'll get a better kill than you normally would. And of course, some of the, talking also creeping Jenny, creeping Charlie, the thistles, some of those things are so persistent, you might have a few peek through next spring, but then reapply in May again. But the fall is a better time with a better kill rate than actually in the spring or summer.
And what's the best way to, are these things that you the kind of the pump and spray where you really want to have a focused spray on it, or do you want to, kind of spray the whole yard? Yeah,
your focused spray is really the way to go, because the herbicides that a person is using and the active ingredients that you find are things like 2,4-D, maybe dicamba on hard-to-kill weeds, or instead of dicamba, which can move through the soil and affect tree roots, I like the active ingredient called triclopyr, 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 which is less apt to cause damage to trees, shrubs, etc., than dicamba, which can move about so rapidly. So hard-to-kill weeds, I look for a lawn weed herbicide with triclopyr in it. And so these active ingredients are not weed preventers. So if your whole lawn isn't a carpet of weeds, there's no reason to put these herbicides on the whole lawn, because they aren't going to do anything other than just run off and cause problems. So it's much easier to target, to spot spray. I like the 2-gallon pump sprays. So you can just measure the amount in, pump it up, and spot spray. I go around to all the weeds so that you've got. And even on a large lawn, that doesn't take so very long. Another useful tool for some of the areas that maybe have more weeds, more so than what I could target with a pump sprayer. Have you ever tried the hose end sprayers? The jar that screws onto the end of a hose, and then you just put the appropriate product in and turn the dial at the top. If it says 1 ounce per gallon, you turn it to the 1 ounce, and it feeds it through as you turn on the hose, and then it feeds it through for a spray like that. And those that works quite well if you've got a larger lawn.
Yeah.
And I found that works quite well too.
Again, let's. So we're talking about weed killing, but then we're also talking about overseeding and fertilizing. Where do we want to put? Let's kind of map this out there.
Yes.
Let's look at our calendar and say,
because it's kind of how do you accomplish all those things when some of the things could adversely affect the others?
Yeah, and you probably don't want to fertilize the weeds.
Exactly. You don't want to fertilize the weeds, but also that weed spray could damage tender young grass seedlings, even though it doesn't harm established grass. Little grass plants, it could. A 2,4-D can damage new little grass. And that's why it's important just to target the actively growing weeds and not get that spray onto the areas that you're seeding. And so I love, I just go along with the pump sprayer and give a little squirt to each dandelion or thistle. And then the chances of getting that herbicide onto what I'm newly seeding is more minimal. That's why spot spraying, I think, is awesome.
So would you spray first, then give it some time, then fertilize, and then overseed?
I think that makes, you could probably interchange those a little bit. But I think that would probably make sense.
Because how the
some of those, like I say, those could be interchangeable. Whether you seed for first or fertilize or weed spray. There's not a hard and fast rule as to which of those have to be done. Again, as long as for example, if you had to carpet your whole lawn with 2,4-D, you'd have to wait. You probably would not be able to seed. Okay. There's that much of a time length on that. And so that's why I advocate spot spraying the weeds.
Yeah, so if you
then that won't affect what you're seeding.
Okay. And, with spot spraying, kind of like watering in a way, do we want to make sure we get the soil around it so that it goes right to the roots? Or do we want to spray, like you were saying, the dandelions? Do we want to spray the leafy parts up top and let that go in through that? Let that be absorbed in through that?
Yeah, the way that it kills and the way that it goes into the root system, you bring up a good point. The way that the herbicide goes into it goes into the plant and into its roots isn't through the soil. That's a great point. It's not through the soil, it's through the leaves. The leaves will absorb the chemical and carry it down internally into the root. Yeah, so it's not absorbed through the soil. That's a good point. And so when you target a weed, spot spray, you're spot spraying the foliage and not the soil around it.
Boy, I've got some big thistles that are just like a dinner plate, so I won't have any trouble finding some surface area there.
To get the herbicide onto.
And I suppose that this is like with herbicides, we should always be cautious of you don't want to do it on a windy day.
Exactly, because these herbicides would also adversely affect any of your flowers, your perennial flowers, or trees and shrubs.
I'm glad you brought out the difference between, was it dicamba and triclopyr?
Right.
Because we just planted a beautiful berry white hydrangea, getting some really nice color on that. But I've also noticed that there are some thistles popping up around there, and they're so close to where the soil and the mulch is around it that I was just like, boy, would I want to spray that, or should I just dig those out? And because I don't want them damaging the I don't want anything to damage the plant. So I was just thinking maybe I should just have to dig those out this year and then hope for the best next year.
Yeah, there are a couple of ways to deal with something like that. A person can always use a cardboard shield next to the plant, the valuable plant like the hydrangea, to make sure that there's no surface drift. But then dicamba, with its ability to kind of move into the soil and persist into the soil, I'd go with the triclopyr. But even so, it doesn't take much of a droplet to get on. So hand digging is certainly a legitimate. Now, with thistles, of course, they've got just a massive underground root system. But if a person is persistent, you dig it out, get as much of the root as you can, and it'll probably come back next spring. But as soon as it's poking through, if you dig it out, those weeds have to photosynthesize. They have to develop a plant and leaves in order to recharge that root system. So if as soon as they poke their little heads up out of the ground, if you kept nipping that off, eventually you can overcome even thistle. But as soon as you would allow it to grow again, then it replenishes itself and you start from square one again. So even a persistent weed can be manually overcome. But the key is to, as soon as any little sprig appears, get it out right away.
You've talked a little bit about this too, but now is also, even though we may not even be ready to start thinking about next year's garden, but if we know that there's an area that maybe we want to develop as planting, you saw my yard where there's some areas where we think we may want to kind of bump out the flower bed a little bit. You say that maybe this is a good time to take care of the grass around there and start kind of getting it ready for next year, right?
It is, and a couple options if you've got an area that you want to get ready, whether it's for a vegetable garden or for a new flower bed, or you want to bump out the landscape a little bit. You could smother the grass with either cardboard weighted down or black plastic. That would have to be in place, so probably for most of the month of September to smother out what's below it. Or you could use glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in original Roundup, and there are other brands of that too. Glyphosate is the active ingredient. And now one nice thing about glyphosate is that it does not have soil activity. So it does not render the soil unable to grow things. So glyphosate can kill off the grass, and then as soon as the grass is dead, you could rototill it up, remove it, and there will be no soil residual from that glyphosate. But again, if a person's looking for a non-chemical way, smothering works as well.
Well, let's take a quick little break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about, speaking of plants and flowers, looking at this is the time for what plants we should be moving and divvying up.
Busy time of year, but fun time of year.
Labor Day is a busy time.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inform.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inform.com.
All right, we've been talking about lawn care and things we need to do around Labor Day to get the lawn ready for next year. Let's talk about flowers and plants. This is a really good time. There are certain plants and flowers that this is the time where you want to be dividing or digging up and moving them. Let's talk about that. Which ones? Let's start with the flowers. What flowers?
Yeah, busy time in the perennial flower garden. Yeah. Because Labor Day is the traditional time to dig and divide peonies.
Okay.
Or if you have to move it, or if your neighbor's got one that they like to part with, you can borrow part of it. And so Labor Day is a great time for peonies. Also bleeding heart. September is a time to dig, divide, or move a bleeding heart. And one of the ways to remember that is for perennials that bloom in earlier spring or early summer, they get divided and transplanted in the fall here.
Okay.
Peonies are usually blooming end of May, first part of June, and so that's why you do those in the fall here. And iris typically August and September. Time to dig and divide, because they can get kind of an increase. That kind of brings up the thought, too. How do you know if something should be dug and divided? Well, if you'd like to share it, well, then, yeah, obviously. But, for example, a patch of iris, over time they multiply, and the center of that patch can start to become bare when all the good stuff is on the outer perimeter. So that's a good key that it needs digging, dividing, and resetting. So you dig the clump up and reset the good things that are on the outside. Same with a peony. They can stay in place many, many years. But if the center of that peony plant starts to be bare, then it's a good idea to dig it up and divide it. You can probably get certainly more than one, and then replant good chunks from that outer perimeter. Rhubarb also Not talking about flowers here, but rhubarb also comes to mind. Fall, September can be a time to do that as well.
What about hostas? Because hostas are something else where it seems to kind of grow out from the middle at least a little bit, and sometimes you will see an opening in the middle. Are hostas a good time, a good one to do in the fall, or is that better in the spring?
Better in the spring, but some of these things, even though there's a best time to do these, where the best chance of success is, and when you have that option, you may as well do it. When it's most advantageous. So hosta is better done in the spring, just as the little sprouts are peeking out of the ground, but it would usually be successful if you were to move one now. So I always mention that, even though there's that recommended time, you can try other things. Lilies in the fall is a good time. Daylilies are so flexible, you can dig and divide those almost any time, but the fall here, September, is a good time for those as well. So a great time to kind of relocate. For example, in our own flower bed, about 3 or 4 years ago, I bought some really nice iris. And, of course, you get just one little division of an iris. Well, now they're making a really nice clump. So I can now divide those, and I'll have even more of that in more spots in the yard. So it's kind of fun to be able to, when you invest in a plant, a few years down the road, you'll be able to have more of that same plant.
My aunt took some of her dad's iris plant, took a section of that, and she replanted it, and now every time that one of her nieces or nephews buys a house or gets their own place, she gives them a clump from that. So we all have some of Grandpa Elroy's irises. So
nice.
It is really nice. And yeah, they are, and that's a great thing. We've talked about irises too, that even while they may flower early, I particularly like the leaves, the kind of the spiky fronds.
Yeah, the bluish green, kind of sword sword-shaped.
Yeah.
Sword-shaped leaves are quite decorative and dramatic, even when they're not blooming.
Yeah, I think they're really great. And I'm glad you talked about rhubarb, because, we tend to think of rhubarb, that we've talked about this before, that after July 1st, you really kind of want to, you can pluck it from time to time, but for the most part, the harvest should be done. So you're allowing the rhubarb to store up energy for next year, but that this is the time to be moving it.
Exactly. Do you know what I'm going to do with, I digress a little bit, but Do you know what I'm going to do with our rhubarb this year? I'm going to plant it in the perennial flower bed.
Oh.
Because I need a little better spot for it, because where I've got it now isn't a preferred spot. It's not doing as well. A number of years ago at Valley Fair, I turned my head and thought, is that what I think it is? In one of their flower beds, they had rhubarb, a mass planting of rhubarb. I think there were 6 or 7 rhubarb, and it was beautiful. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So I'm going to include that in our perennial flower bed.
I live by Concordia College, and on the west side of their campus, there was a little patch there where the rhubarb would just get huge. And I'm not sure if it was a different kind of variety of rhubarb or if it was some kind of a wild variety, but it would just get massive. And yeah, even as as it's got this great leaf structure, this great massive leaf. Rhubarb do work as a plant to really look at and
I'm
enjoy.
going to try it in the perennial flower garden.
I think that's a great one. What plants should we be digging up and bringing indoors? Are there certain ones that now we should be looking at that if we wanted to summer them outside to get them the sun, but then we want to overwinter them, which ones should we be looking at there?
Our favorite are the geraniums. We've carried geraniums over for many, many years. And when I say carry them over, what I love about geraniums is they're so flexible that there are 2 different approaches you can take. And now is the time, late August, early September, Labor Day, is the time to do this. We can take cuttings from the geraniums and start brand new plants. And so to take geranium cuttings, you take tip cuttings from the fresh new growth from the tips, about a 3-inch cutting, and you take off the bottom leaves. Those spots originate from what are called nodes, kind of the bumps on the stems. And so you take off the bottom leaves and expose that node, and then I like to root them in vermiculite, which is the little beads of gold. You buy that at the garden center, or a mixture of vermiculite and peat moss. Sometimes I'll use sand. That can work too. So instead of trying to root them in water, which I know that can work, but they rot more easily in water than they do in these other mixes. So each year, my wife Mary and I take about 100 geranium cuttings, and then those are the ones that we're going to use. We'll root them now. They seem to root really nice in late August and early September. And so we actually root them in old 4-packs, those 4-pack cell packs, plastic cell packs that we save from garden centers.
Oh, smart.
And fill those with the mixture, the media, and then insert those cuttings down in that. And then we put them in kind of a shady spot outside.
Okay.
And they get good airflow, water them when they need, and they root usually within about 2 weeks or so. And then we will take those into the basement, and when they're well rooted, we put them into 4-inch pots. That's the size of geranium pot that you buy at the garden centers, a 4-inch square pot usually, or round. And then we grow them under lights all winter. By next May, you have a plant just like the one you would buy at a garden center. So we take cuttings. The second thing you can do is we don't usually throw out the plant itself. The geranium plants, before frost, we pull them up out of the pots. And now don't be alarmed, but we cut the plant totally back to about 2 to 3 inches above soil line. There may be no leaves left, and then trim the roots a little bit, and then we repot those again into a 4-inch pot, kind of like the pot from the greenhouse or garden center, and then pot those up and grow those under lights in the basement. So you can multiply geraniums in a hurry because you've got the original plants that you're going to winter, plus you've got all these cuttings that you took off of them. And so you can multiply geraniums in a hurry. We've gone from 8 geranium plants up to 200 geranium plants in the course of a season. So, we have to maintain. We only have so much space in our basement to grow geraniums.
Yeah.
So obviously I can't grow thousands. But so each year we bring some of the original plants in, cut them back, pot them up, but we also take cuttings so that we're freshening up the crop. So otherwise, over time, the geranium plant can get kind of old and woody at the base. There are other ways that we can talk about sometime. You can take geraniums in the basement, keep them kind of dormant a little bit. There are ways of doing that too. But anyway, geranium is my favorite one for bringing in. But if you're also doing hibiscus, the tropical hibiscus, you can move those into a sunny window. Also, some of the plants such as mandevilla, or mandevilla, some pronounce it, that vining type, that comes in very nice. Begonias, coleus, many of those can either have a cutting taken and root and start a new plant, or bring the plant itself in. Important to wash the plants off good, because sometimes there will be bugs that will hitchhike their way on in, and so make sure you wash them up good too.
I'm glad you said coleus because that's something that we've tried to do. We took clippings before and we put them in a little jar full of water, and they did.
They root quite easily.
They rooted really well. But I think also too, like you were saying, that you really need to put them in a soil mixture too.
Exactly. You know what the reason for that is? Because roots that form in water are kind of adapted to water. When they root in a solid media like a good potting mix or vermiculite, peat moss, sand, etc., those roots are more fibrous and they're already adapted to that more like a soil-like media. So it's a different root that forms in water. And the roots that form in water, when you go to transplant them into potting mix, it's a little more foreign, and there's more chance that they may not adapt as well. Now, I know our mom and grandma, they rooted in water, and it grows just fine. But there's a better chance it'll take off better if it's rooted in something like sand, vermiculite, potting soil, peat moss.
And it's also a time, too, that now we should be keeping an eye on the weather, because any kind of tropical plants that we've had outside, plants that even if we're not going to take a clippings of, but that we need to move them inside.
Yeah, sometimes, do you ever do like a houseplant vacation, move some of your houseplants outside? They do well out in kind of a protected spot. And, of course, most houseplants are of tropical nature, and if it gets too much below 50, they can have some chilling injury.
Yeah, we don't see that necessarily right now in the 10-day forecast from where we are, but here in around August 24th.
It's also a great time. Yeah, it's also a great time before frost and things, and before you bring these plants in. Anything that needs repotting that you're going to bring in, it is so much easier to do that out on the picnic table or somewhere outside than it is on the kitchen table or in the basement. And so, it's just so much easier to do those things outside when the weather is still mild.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for another episode of Growing Together. Don, if people have questions, what's the best way to reach you?
Feel free to email me anytime. The address is donald.kinsler, KINZLER, at ndsu.edu.
Well, that sounds great, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, thank you, John, and have a great week, everyone.